Today's case is from the Coal Mountain area of Forsyth County in the 1970s, a quiet little hamlet nestled in the foothills of the North Georgia mountains. Atlanta was expanding northward and on its way to Forsyth County. The initial section of Georgia Highway 400 was completed the prior year in May. This would bring growth to the sparsely populated area with a largely agricultural economy. Forsyth County was 60 miles north of Atlanta, giving its residents easy access to good job opportunities, but far enough to enjoy the peace and quiet at home. Although the town had a long history of racial tension, it was not known for violent murders. In January 1972, just 4 months before today's case, Chief Deputy James Cantrell and his ride-along, Special Deputy Larry Mulkey, were murdered in cold blood. While responding to a burglary call, they stopped a vehicle on U.S. Highway 19 south of Cumming. The deputies were abducted, forced into the trunk of their patrol car, and fatally shot by the suspects. Mulkey had written the license plate of the suspect's vehicle and hidden it between the seats, which led to the arrest and conviction of the 4 murderers. They were sentenced only 2 weeks before, so fear and emotions were high in Coal Mountain. It was April 30th, and Wilma and C.W. Morgan lived in Coal Mountain with their 2 sons, Michael, who was 23, and Stephen, who was 15. Michael was married to Hollis Wingo, and together they had 1 child, baby Michelle, who was 2 years old. Michael and Hollis lived with his parents because they were waiting on their mobile home to be delivered and set up. It was a gift from the Morgans. While living with them, Michelle slept in a crib in the front room of her grandparents' bedroom. In older houses, you would have to pass through a front room to get to the main bedroom. That night, Michael, Stephen, Hollis, and baby Michelle went shopping and then to see a movie at the Buford Lake Drive-In, about 30 minutes or so from the Morgan family home. When they arrived back at home that night, Michael noticed the light on the porch was off, which was not normal. And as he was getting his key out, he noticed the door wasn't locked and he was easily able to push the door open. Hollis passed Michael and put baby Michelle into her crib. When she turned on the light, that is when Hollis saw the blood. She started screaming and Michael came running. When he saw what Hollis was screaming about, he grabbed the baby and backed out of his parents' blood-soaked bedroom. He told Stephen and Hollis to take the baby and go back outside and wait in the car. He then called police and reported the gruesome scene in his family home. Deputy Jim Ingram received the 911 call on Sunday, April 30th, 1972 at 3:45 a.m. Michael Morgan said, "I don't know what's going on, but something terrible has happened to my mom." Officer Jim had just returned to the station from patrol, so he turned around and headed out to the Morgan residence. When he arrived, Michael Morgan met him at the front door and described what he had seen earlier. Together, they went inside and headed towards the bedroom where they found Wilma. They could see she had been violently attacked. There were at least 3 gunshot wounds to her head, and she had sustained multiple stab wounds on her chest. Jim recognized the 45-year-old Mrs. Morgan. She was a teller at the Bank of Cumming, where he did his banking. On the floor, he spotted several bullet casings and a bloody butcher knife, which would turn out to be from their kitchen. As he rounded the bed, he found Claiborne Wallace Morgan, who went by C.W., on the floor with deep defensive wounds to his hands. He had gunshot wounds, and his throat was cut so severely that he was almost decapitated. He was 49 years old and a foreman at Southern Textile Mills in Atlanta. Deputy Jim saw Wilma moving, so he called for an ambulance, who rushed her to Forsyth County Hospital. The sheriff, Donald Perkle, arrives just as the ambulance was leaving. The GBI had also been called in, and Sheriff Perkle was bringing Agent Bert Fry up to date when he noticed a car in the driveway. He inquired whose vehicle that was and was told it was the Morgans' children, who all lived in the home. The sheriff speaks to Michael, Stephen, and Hollis and allows them to leave shortly after to go to their grandparents' home, the Woffords. And from 5 a.m. that morning until 1:30 a.m. the next morning, the sheriff and GBI investigated the crime scene, gathering evidence. The point of entry is thought to be the back door. It had a pane of glass knocked out as if to allow someone to reach through and unlock the door. There was 1 set of bloody footprints, and that led them to believe it was only one assailant. Police also found a handgun that didn't belong to anyone in the home and the butcher knife in the bedroom. Police wondered if this was a robbery gone wrong. It was a violent murder and looks like a robbery, but there is no evidence of anything stolen. C.W. had $300 in his wallet, and Wilma had $150 in her purse. There was other cash in the home, as well as jewelry and other items of value that had not been touched. Police felt the attacker would have defensive wounds, as it was obvious C.W. had fought back. Police were stumped. There were no leads, no sexual assault, no obvious signs of robbery, and no motive that they could come up with. Wilma was in the hospital with severe brain injuries, and doctors had determined she'd been shot 7 times. Everyone was hoping she'd pull through and identify her attacker, but she unfortunately died from her injuries 2 days after the attack on May 2nd. C.W.'s funeral was scheduled for that day, so it was decided to postpone his funeral by 1 day so they could have a joint service for the couple on May 3rd, 1972. Claiborne Wallace Morgan and Wilma Ellen Morgan are buried together at Coal Mountain Baptist Church. With these murders, along with the deputy murders just 4 months earlier, the town is spooked. People started buying guns and locking their doors at night. The GBI had little to go on. There were no clues or leads and no evidence that the Morgans had an enemy who wanted them dead. The agents began to suspect the Morgan children of being involved, or at least knowing more than they admitted to. They went back to the house, studied the back door where the break-in had occurred, and they thought it looked staged. A large piece of glass that had been knocked out of the pane would not have cleared the door. If the window was broken and the door would have hit that piece of glass, it would have broken into smaller pieces. It's also possible they would have stepped on the glass. But the glass was not disturbed. The investigators had a few more questions, so they called Michael, Stephen, and Hollis Morgan back to the home. Investigators were starting to question the children's stories, so they confronted Michael, telling him it did not appear to be a robbery. So they asked him, "What do you think happened?" Michael said a jewelry box was taken. This was the first time a missing jewelry box was mentioned. Michael also said 2 pocketbooks of his mother's was missing. Police couldn't figure out why anyone would break into this home and steal a jewelry box with no valuable jewelry and purses with no money in them and leave cash behind. As Deputy Jim thought back to the night of the crime, he remembered how horrific the crime scene was, and he remembered that Michael didn't seem fazed by the crime scene. The deputy thought he was in shock at the time, but now it's looking suspicious. There was still no evidence that an unknown party was involved. 3 weeks after the murder, Lieutenant Fry from the GBI gets a call from Hollis Morgan. It's been reported she made this call just before taking a polygraph test. She told him to bring the necessary papers and arrest me. I haven't been able to sleep, I've been going through hell, and I just need to deal with this. So they brought her in. This is the statement provided by Hollis Morgan. Hollis said the plan originated as a robbery on the Woffords, Wilma's parents, but eventually it was decided to just kill C.W. and Wilma for their inheritance. Hollis told police that Michael Morgan had planned the murder. She said they had talked about it many times. She said they'd even asked young Stephen Morgan if it was okay to kill the parents, and he approved, but stated he didn't want anything to do with it. Hollis said Stephen was around multiple times when they were planning the murder. The Morgans were worth an estimated $60,000, and they also owned 100 acres of land near Lake Lanier, which was incredibly valuable. Hollis told police, "I know my husband Michael had his father and mother killed." She detailed how Michael went into the Greenlight Bar in DeKalb County and met up with their friend and former roommate, 24-year-old Robert Howard. Hollis and Michael had lived with Howard the first time they had been married. This was their second marriage. They had split up and remarried in 1971. Hollis said Howard had been given a key to the front door and had fired a gun 10 times. Hollis also stated Howard had Bob Shaw help him commit the murders. She mentioned they discussed a plan to kill the Woffords so they could inherit that money also, and implied the eventual plan was to kill Stephen too. But Michael did not want to kill his brother. Police arrested Michael Morgan, Robert Howard, and Bob Shaw. After the arrests, Hollis moved back home with baby Michelle to her parents in Norcross, Georgia, about 40 minutes north of Coal Mountain. Within a few days, Hollis was arrested too. She attempted suicide 2 days after her arrest. To get to her cell, she'd have to pass through a cleaning closet and she grabbed a container of drain cleaner and drank it when she got back to her cell. She was rushed to Forsyth County Hospital and later taken to Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. She had severe burns on her throat and in her stomach. In the 3 months between her arrest and her court appearance, she had lost 20 pounds. Howard said he had met Michael Morgan and his wife Hollis at a club in DeKalb called the Green Light Club. He stated Michael had asked him if he knew anyone who would kill his parents. Howard said he would let them know. After a week, the three met up again, where Howard stated he would do it. Hearing this, Hollis expressed her gratitude and thanked him. Howard said on the weekend of the murders, he brought his friend, 25-year-old Decatur native Bob Shaw, to Forsyth County. They went to the Morgan's house, where Michael gave him a pair of gloves, and they stayed at the home for about 20 minutes. That night, the two men went to 6 Mile Creek Put-In area in nearby Dawson County to fish and spend the night there. That Saturday night, Howard said he and Bob Shaw went to Gainesville for supper before driving back to Forsyth County. They grabbed a snack at a service station and then drove by the Morgans' home a couple times before Shaw parked across the street. Howard said Shaw waited in the car while he went inside. And once inside, from Stephen's room, he turned on the light. He stuck a gun around the corner into the Morgans' bedroom and started firing. Thinking it was all over, he started getting the jewelry box when he heard C.W. groaning. In a panic, he went to the kitchen to get a butcher knife, and he then fought with Mr. Morgan, brutally hacking him to death. He got the jewelry box, the pocketbooks, and left. The following day, in an attempt to destroy the evidence, he burned his clothes and buried everything else. According to Howard, he met with Mike and Hollis Morgan one more time at the Green Light Club near Atlanta. When asked about the gun, Howard answered he had borrowed it from someone at the club named Randy or Ted and returned the gun to them after. He couldn't remember the person's name, and the gun was never found. The statement from Bob Shaw stated he and Howard had eaten, went fishing, and then he had parked across from the house. Shaw said he waited in the car while Howard went inside, consistent with other statements made by Howard and Hollis. Sometime later, Howard returned to the car, covered in blood, and they drove back to their 6 Mile Creek campsite. In addition to the above statement, Shaw said the murder had been attempted one time previously, but when he and Howard drove by the house, a neighbor was having a party, and they feared they'd be seen, which, when told, Hollis appeared dismayed the Morgans were still alive. In Michael Morgan's version of events, he had been threatened by his wife Hollis. She threatened to take their baby and leave him if he didn't kill his parents. She repeatedly told him she couldn't live with them any longer. His only defense is she made me do it. Michael said she wanted Stephen and the Woffords gone too. Even through all this, the Woffords, Wilma's parents, still paid for both boys' defense and legal fees while providing a roof over their heads during the trial. When Mr. Wofford testified on the behalf of Michael Morgan, he said the boy must be insane because no one could go through the murder of his parents and feel no emotions. Mr. Wofford even testified that Michael wasn't even tore up over it. He broke down and cried, thinking of his daughter's murder. He didn't understand his grandson, describing Michael as immature, stating he had never grown up and was withdrawn and incapable of handling his finances during his marriages to Hollis. The jury rejected his insanity plea and made him stand trial. The prosecutor said Michael Morgan was a mad dog and mad dogs deserved to be put down. The jury agreed, and Michael Morgan was sentenced to death in the electric chair. Hollis Morgan was sentenced to death in the electric chair. She was the first woman to be sentenced to death in Georgia since 1950. Stephen Morgan was not tried as an adult, but was charged with conspiracy in the two murders. Since he was a minor, his court case was tried in juvenile court in September. There was no jury, and Judge Burtz found that he did not commit the murders, but was aware it was going to happen. Stephen Morgan was released to the Forsyth County Juvenile Authorities from the Youth Detention Center in Gainesville. He was allowed to continue his education, provided he enrolls in a private school outside of Forsyth County. Stephen has since lived a quiet life with his family. Bob Shaw was offered a plea deal for murder with a life sentence. He accepted this deal and detailed his involvement in the case. The judge reduced his sentence from life to 15 years for his cooperation. Robert Howard was sentenced to death in the electric chair. And shortly after the trials, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the way the death penalty was being used at the time was unfair and inconsistent against the poor and people of color. This meant every death sentence prior would be commuted to life imprisonment. Hollis Wingo Morgan was released in 1985. Years later, she remarried and lived a quiet life until her passing on July 3, 2003. Michael Lloyd Morgan and Robert George Howard were denied parole for over 32 years. The last reference to either was in the Forsyth County News in 2004, and both were still incarcerated. Howard being denied parole 19 times, and Michael denied parole 18 times. Their whereabouts today are unknown. Bob Shaw died at the age of 30 while still in prison on February 14, 1978. Specific details regarding his death, including the location and circumstances, are not provided in our available sources. Today, baby Michelle Morgan would now be in her 50s. Hopefully, this tragedy hasn't followed her whole life. If you've made it this far, thank you. And if you've enjoyed our content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. We will be uploading once a month and will be focusing on solved true crime cases. We hope you join us for our next video. And also, if you have any case suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. We look forward to hearing from you. Bye.